lines of business. You guys can still hear me? Yeah? Okay, cool. You talked about the lines of business, the different phases. So let's move into talking about the solution a little bit. Let me go to the next slide. So retail and care center were first. And so with the phases, the implementations that we did, we definitely started out by crawling before we started to run, right? And the first phase was very foundational. So can you speak to, the retail and care center, the different work streams of work that we did that were very foundational for the other lines of business?
Yeah, the thing that stands out for me, and when you talk about the technical things that are specific to your care center, having a fair amount of experience just in care center alone, it was easy for us to paint a vision for those leaders and say, look, you're going to have this wealth of information that we're going to have that's going to be in Salesforce, and you've got your Cisco ACD that's out there. How can we make that experience the best it can be for your agents? So we put a few technical pieces in there, screen pops and whatnot, did some automation. So that was a great lift for our care center. But looking at how retail and the care center work together, we really understood they're going to be asking a lot of similar questions, but there's a back office that supports many, many things that happen. So we have deposit ops, we have loan ops, we have treasury ops, we have digital ops. So how, what are the pain points and what can we do to help with that? And what stood out the most was, well, everybody's communicating via email, and they're communicating via email about customer, service opportunities, needs, crises, fraud, all of these things, and email is, you should not be doing that. So we invested a ton of time in building out cases. So not just saying, okay, what do you need to do and how do we describe it, but who does it need to go to? What are the SLAs? What are your escalation paths? How do you have visibility into work that's happening or not happening? So that work, even though it was not glamorous, it really set us up for future work where our other lines of business now can say, okay, we see what you're doing, and we see how powerful it can be. When it really comes down to the change aspect, we still have, and still today, I still have conversations with users or leaders of certain groups, and they say, but we just like email. It's easy and it's fast. And so then we have to educate and we say, well, that's good for you, but that doesn't help us as an enterprise. It doesn't help somebody in insurance who's looking at this customer 360 understand that you just solved a problem for them. That's lost in email, and whether or not anyone can recognize what's going on with that customer is a mystery. But if you take the time and you use the system, then that surfaces in the 360. So some good things, some good foundational pieces. Our care center absolutely loves us. They can't say anything except how excited they are, and we keep iterating on what's there. I'm looking at Jessica back there, who's my retail partner in crime. We have real conversations about, okay, what is next? How do we make things a little bit easier and a little bit easier? When we get to our lending teams, they run the show. They write the big deals, and if they want to run around with a spreadsheet or a big chief tablet and write deals, that's great. But the other conversation that we're having with that team, we're going to invest a lot in LOS, and we're going to build out these things for you, and we're going to integrate your pricing platform. So at some point, your leadership is going to tell you, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. And I know that's a phrase a lot of us have thrown around. But how do we also affect the change for those groups and try to add value? So we're doing that in the same way. And I feel like I rabbit trailed a little bit, but There's so many moving parts,
Yeah, for sure.
and it takes a village to move this thing forward.
Yeah, so retail care center, we stood up FSC, foundational FSC functionality.
Right.
Stood up marketing cloud for journeys, email distribution.
Even mention marketing cloud wherever Brian is.
Yep.
There you are.
We have Brian in the room. Integrated with banking core through MuleSoft. And then second phase with treasury lending and insurance, we basically rolled onto that. We added those lines of business. They leveraged the same functionality to get that customer 360 view so that you could arguably upsell across organizations, lines of business, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was the outcome like? I mean, you kind of talked about this with Care Center, obviously they're bought in, but what's generally been the adoption, the feedback from all the different lines?
I would say Care Center raves. I would say retail would really like us to get our data strategy in place so that Salesforce becomes more of a one-stop shop. We had a heavy integration with our banking core. We pull a ton of information. It's all real time. It's impressive what we can put in front of those teams. But when they need to get things done, they'd sometimes, depending on their function, they would really like for us to have that data strategy in place where we have data moving two ways throughout the organization. Our goal is to create a single pane that, we want to reduce swivel, reduce duplicate data entry, and have a single pane that is intuitive. So for that team, I think we still have, that big piece. I would say from our treasury and insurance perspective, those two lines of business love it because they are producers. So they are looking at this thing and saying, oh, I can get better referrals. I can send better referrals. I can track and talk about my pipeline. And those groups love it. Like I mentioned, lending, they're going to be a slow roll, unfortunately. But they bring in the bread and butter. So, we're not going to force it on them.
Yep. So, just as a reference to this, everything in blue is all the work that's either been completed or is in process. And so I think the thing to just allude to now is those are the first few phases that we did. We're now, going into year 3 or so. And so now we're on this journey related to data. So if you could just kind of talk to Data Hub and what we're doing there.
Yeah, for sure. Kudos to my buddy Albert back here. Albert's our director of analytics and really leads our enterprise data program. But let me tell you what that is. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got really 4 cores that support our lines of business. If you were to ask us 2 years ago, define customer, you'd get 4 different answers, depending on what's in which core. So early on, we realized, okay, we need a single view of the customer, and we think that should live in Salesforce. Our enterprise data program really has taken that and said, okay, if we're going to do it, how do we do it right? And so now what we need to start talking about is, instead of having your source of truth for a customer live in Salesforce, it actually needs to live in something that is outside of Salesforce, because you don't want the computation and the calculations, you don't want that in your CRM as a layer. You'd really like that in a foundational layer that is normalized, that's pre-processed, that's available all the time. And here's what's key, not just available to Salesforce. You can build it in Salesforce, absolutely. If that's the right scale, do it, because it's going to be valuable to your end users. But if you have these bigger goals of saying a unified experience in mobile across all your lines of business, that's where that data strategy comes in. Or I want to create in the moment real-time nudges via Marketing Cloud, a data strategy. I want to build out my analytics because I have other processes that need to leverage that data for some ML or some other advanced analytics. So the data strategy is really meant to focus not on warehousing and not focus on analytics, but focus on data portability. So how do we move data? And one of those destinations is going to be your warehouse, absolutely. But how do I move that data in real time or near real time to different applications, different user groups, so that they then can have this very rich data set that we own, but we've yet to be able to leverage to its fullest potential because it's trapped in this core or that core, and we have analysts that can stitch it together, but guess what? That takes time. So and I'm gonna look at Brian again, if our marketing team, wants to create some sort of, experience via web, via mobile, and use real-time data about what someone has just done, what step they have taken, what path they have gone down in the website. We can't do that with traditional analytics in a data warehouse. We need something that is meant to be a hub and spoke, where that data is processed, that gives us our golden record of what a customer is and tracks their behavior, and then we can react. And so that's a huge part of what we're doing. And then as we're in this process, Albert's one of the voices in the room saying, hey, we should be doing governance, we should be doing proper MDM, and those things that we need to do to make sure that we're building something that's correct and scalable and will last. And those sorts of arguments as well enable proper conversations with those individuals who are signing the checks for this work. So they're making sure that we're thinking about the right things as well.
Yeah, you're looking holistically across the organization, how to enable them, so good stuff. So let's, I guess, talk about what's next. 2023 beyond, what's the roadmap look like for supporting that transformation vision?
Yeah, so a lot of things on this slide. So when we talk about connected experience, and I'm just going to hit all 6 of these, and hopefully some things resonate, and then when we get into Q&A, maybe there's some deeper conversation. But connected, we talk about unified and clear stories for our customers. So how can we be unified in our messaging? How can we be clear on what we're offering and what we feel they need? One thing I failed to mention, I talked about purpose and values and impacting 10 million lives. One of our taglines, which you can maybe see up there in the middle, it says spend life wisely. So one way to think about that, today we're really a financial services company who also likes to talk about how do we help people progress in their life, how do they have financial well-being, how do they have physical well-being, how do they impact their own community. In the next few years, I wouldn't hesitate to say that we want to flip that, and we want to be a wellness company who offers financial services products. So there's a mindset shift, and so when we talk about a connected experience, it's a connected experience with this long-term goal of helping people progress, helping people make the right decisions. Don't make short-term decisions where you say, oh, I'm going to buy this really nice flashy car, but I can't pay for something else. Let's have those conversations and build the relationships and make the relationship a focus. Intuitive journeys. If everything's connected and we can really understand our customer, we should be able to create something that's intuitive. Our data strategy, definitely API led, but I can tell you we have tough conversations with our architecture, the owners of our development teams, where real conversations, if this thing has to be API, well, it actually doesn't. We can do that now, and we can add value to the business, and we can get there later. So I say API led, it's a preference, but it's not a hard and fast rule. Flexible, yeah, absolutely flexible to the needs of the business from a data perspective. With Experience Cloud, again, intuitive journeys, data flows, workflows, building that single pane is something we want to focus on. Also, how do we engage our customers? So how do we create the right portals and the right customer-facing offers that enable self-service? Boy, change is huge. We talked about it a little bit, but there's heavy focus on communications, both internal and external. How do we send the right message, and how do we say that? How do we do that at an enterprise level? I'm not sure, I'm sure all of you are from different size organizations, but at some point you need an internal communications team dedicated to that, and getting the decisions to make that happen has been a journey. Also in change, learning and creating the right structures to support all of this agile movement, right? So if you're iterating and you're agile and you're releasing 4 or 6 times a year, you can't leave training by the wayside. That has to be supported and has to be almost integrated into your sprint work. That's what we're finding. I need people who can hold that perspective, who are actually in refinement, who can look at it from a customer, end user perspective, and say, well, okay, this is how I'm going to interpret this, and this is how we're going to start developing that. Change readiness and hypercare, 2 other things we're focused on in that space. From a marketing perspective, I'm probably going to say things, and Brian's going to throw something at me because it's incorrect. But at the end of the day, really leveraging data to make the marketing impressions and really refine the personas. Not just have 4 or 5. We should have many more than that. But how do we get more precise with those messages and become more real time, automate those journeys, and then intelligence and analytics. We've got big dreams. I mean, Albert, I think I would say 17 or 18 months that we've been talking and planning and devising what we want to do from a strategic perspective. So there's a ton that we want to do, but we can't do it until we have an easy, quick, real-time place to leverage that data and to do that processing. So a lot of things there,
and you mentioned LOS, Encino.
Encino is
not on here, but
not on there, but also supporting that. And
yep.
As we get deeper into our lines of business, we find out, well, there's a connector that we need to bring in for this line of business, and there's another integration with another third party. So as this thing spiders out, it's getting more complex. So yeah.
But you spoke to flexibility. I think, like, looking forward, the data hub having the flexibility to shift, adapt to pulling in a new integration. We have that flexibility, which is nice.
Yeah, that's a great point. That the investment in our what we're calling our data hub actually speeds our integrations in the future. So investment right now, build the right platform, and then as those integrations come in, we can move much faster. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that wraps our Q&A. I'd like to open it up to any questions. If there are questions, raise your hand and we'll call on you.